Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 23 of the 11th season of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue, song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Last week's episode looked at the number 3 version of Walls, and oddly, there really wasn't much chatter about this one on social media. Now, I suspect it's because everyone more or less had their say when I covered the circus version back in November. However, I did get a couple of comments on Blue Sky. My pal Steve Ursel, who, like me, is a Manchester United fan, so we are going through some shared trauma at the moment. Our team's struggling mightily. Anyway, Steve said, "Ever since you did your episode on Wall's Circus, I've become increasingly obsessed with this song. It's beautiful, perfectly crafted, and emotionally weighted. And the pleasure that brings me, Steve, cannot be measured. Like I think I've said this before. Anytime anyone says they've fallen in love with or rediscovered a song because of this podcast, it always makes me giddily happy. The whole point of this show is to appreciate this music. So the fact that you've found this song and really enjoy it is just delightful to hear. And I've mentioned on Blue Sky that I think I might try a cover of this one with the fabulous Randy Woods. So I'm going to chat to him tonight when we record our Queen podcast. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully I'll have some news. On Instagram, Lisa Kelly Pennington guessed my score, though Lisa, I don't think this one was a shocker, so I don't know if you should really be counting this one, to be honest with you. And on Facebook, Bob Reedy and Mary Beth Donnelly kept it short and sweet, with Bob saying, great lyrics from a great song, and Mary Beth simply observing good life philosophy. And that would be in reference to my graphic that I put up, Some Days Are Diamonds, Some Days Are Rocks. And I did want to quickly name check the immeasurably wonderful Paul Zollo too. Obviously, you all know his name. I reference him all the time in this show. He's probably the most important source of information that I have on this show. And he left a comment on my Zero from Outer Space episode on YouTube. And it's just lovely to get positive feedback from not just a writer, but also a musician who I have nothing but massive respect for. Paul said, "Hello, my friend Kevin. So appreciate the depth of each show, but always presented with such ease and joy, which matches the subject. Always a pleasure to listen to. Your love for Tom is beautiful and infectious. And always, big love, revel in your abandon." And he went on to say about Zero from Outer Space, "I got no more on this song from him. He didn't seem to have great regard for these songs on She's the One. Even Supernatural Radio, which I so love, is one he rolled his eyes on when I mentioned it. These seemed like leftover songs to him. Not B songs, really, but maybe A-, but not to me. Love the joy and purity you bring to your celebrations of Tom's genius. Nobody does this better than you." So how cool is that? I mean, like I said, Paul's a phenomenal songwriter and performer in his own right. He's a superb journalist and writer apart from that. Oh, and also an exceptional photographer who finds ways to discover the truth in images and situations that most people can't. So, again, it's a joy and it's a thrill to hear that he's still checking out the podcast from time to time. And I do agree with him with the quality of the songs on this record. I think I've mentioned this before. I really do suspect that Tom's personal situation at this moment in his life when this album was recorded really colored his memories of this period of his career, which is really sad in a lot of ways because there is some great stuff on this record. All right, well, that's all your social media for this week, meaning we can get started on this penultimate track from this album. Thanks as always for your wonderful comments. Keep sending them in. I'll keep reading them out. It's time to talk about the last of the Wildflowers songs that was moved over to this album, Hung Up and Overdue. All right, let's get into it. This song features members of rock royalty from both sides of the Atlantic. First of all, we have a drummer you may have heard of from a band that made a bit of a splash back in the 60s. The Beatles, don't know if you've probably heard of those guys. Mr. Richard Starkey, better known as Ringo, provided drums for this one in addition to his performance on To Find a Friend in the Wildflowers sessions. The other legendary musician comes from an equally regarded band of close harmony singers named the Beach Boys. Again, you've probably heard of these guys. And the chap, of course, lending his harmony vocals to this track went by the name of Carl Wilson. Carl passed tragically on February 6, 1998, at the same age I am now, 51. Very sobering to think that. The Beach Boys released an album that was recorded in 95, 96, so this track, along with those, would have been among the last that he worked on. In the liner notes for Wildflowers and all the rest, Benmont notes that This reminds me of a Jeff Lynne period song, which, yeah, I, I think I know what he means, but this definitely fits Wildflowers more than it would fit, say, Into the Great Wide Open or Full Moon Fever. Co-producer Rick Rubin remembers that Tom was really excited that Carl Wilson agreed to come down and sing on this one, saying, "Me, Tom, and Carl sat on the floor at Mike's studio and meditated before the session. Ben is so good on this one. A gift from the sun to the moon," and that's obviously a reference to one of the lyrics in the song. And Mike Campbell remembers recording Carl's vocals at his house, saying, "Somebody called Carl up and he just came over to the house and did the overdubs here. And he came up with some great parts on the song. That was a great day." And for his part, Tom tells Paul Zollo in Conversations with Tom Petty that, "I'm really happy with Up and Overdue. That might be the best song on the album." Now, it's curious that Tom would make that observation about a song that was never once played live, at least that I could find. All right, so the song begins with a fantastic chord progression. D major, A minor, F major 7th. It's a very unexpected progression in a Petty song for me because it's something that you'd usually hear in, say, it's like a Nirvana song or a Pixies song or something in the sort of the alt vein a little bit more. And it's because it's got that very slight unease to the progression that's created because the root notes of each of those chords are the 3 notes that make up the D minor chord. So D, F, and A. That's your D minor chord, right? But you have a major, a minor, and then a major 7 being played in a staggered form. So straight away from a musical standpoint, this song has always stood out to me as being really quite different in Tom's catalogue, certainly to this point anyway. After the first playing of this progression on guitar, we have cello brought in low, and after a further iteration, Tom's vocal comes straight in. So it's a short, get-to-the-point intro in the longest song on the record. When Tom's vocal does come in, there's a very short, tight delay on it that gives it it's a very John Lennon feel to me. If you listen to a song like Watching the Wheels from Double Fantasy, you really hear that type of effect that they were going for, and it's really effective. Again, it gives the song a different sonic quality that still fits in with the rest of the songs that Tom wrote for the Wildflowers sessions. Throughout this intro and into the first verse, we also have Ringo playing a very gentle, slightly opened hat to mark the 2s and 4s, where the snare will end up being eventually. We also have Benmont playing the chord progression just on each beat on the piano, and an acoustic guitar, which is mixed more or less straight down the middle rather than being panned either left or right. The second half of the verse is kicked into life with a thundering snare and tom fill, or floor tom fill, before the chord progression changes to E minor to A. The drum pattern is interesting in this section because it definitely sounds like Ringo is playing the kick drum on every beat and the snare on the 2 and 4 as well. The snare is so beefy though that it could just be that and not the kick, but I'm pretty sure he's playing a 4 on the floor kick pattern here, which is unusual also for a slow song. That sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 on the kick is way more prevalent in upbeat rockers or definitely in disco music. Howie Epstein's just walking the bass a little during this section, just to give some little step ups and down around that very lazily driving kick drum. This E minor A progression then gives way to the chorus, where Carl Wilson's harmony vocals come in to complement Tom's lead, and you immediately get why someone would have thought of him for this part. As Tom descends through that line, "For a dream come true," you really do get a very Beach Boys sort of vibe to that melody. Now, I'll be level with you, I'm not a huge fan of the Beach Boys by any means, but I've heard enough of their music to know that this is exactly the type of melody and harmony coupling that they excelled at and used frequently in their songs. Through this chorus, Benmont is still playing those chords on each beat of the bar, and the strings now are providing a little movement behind the steady, simple rhythm section. After this first chorus, we get a really nice turnaround back into the verse that is doubled between the guitar and the piano. It's another tasteful little arrangement decision that is accompanied by Ringo's delicate cymbal work, opening and closing the hats ever so slightly to give each hit a slightly different texture. Very, very nice. The second verse sounds brighter than the first, with the hats now being more prominent alongside that kick snare pattern, which has now changed to be a more typical backbeat of kick on the 1s and 3s and snare on the 2s and 4s. The piano's also brought a little further forward, and those strings swim in and out of focus, and added that sort of like a lazy summer afternoon feel to the song that I just really enjoy that. And I love the framing of the lyric here too. She said she's going to move to California one day. Said she's going to go out on safari to stay. She's tired of her job and the snow. We both need somewhere to go. She's tired of the snow. Linked with moving to California is a very nice visual. It's a good contrast. And you get that sense of, someone living up in Chicago or Wisconsin and wanting to get the hell out of there and get away from the biting cold. And you know what? As a resident of Saskatchewan, where we have just had a really, really bad 2-week cold snap, I can definitely relate to that. The chorus comes in and is accompanied again by a very Strawberry Fields Mellotron line in that left channel. And I do find this to be a very John Lennon feeling song overall to me. So it's really cool that Ringo's on it, of course, and then even cooler that they brought in Carl Wilson to add a little bit of, West Coast American flair. It feels like it's a nod back to those pop heydays of the 60s. After this chorus, we then get the turnaround again, but this time into the bridge rather than the next verse. Now we have a tambourine coming in double time with the piano and pretty sure the harpsichords in there taking a more prominent melodic role, with the bass line adding in some nice movement that a guitar lick might ordinarily provide. So after the vocal bridge section, we then get my favorite part of this song. The piano and bass take the lead, with Benmont moving up the keyboard into the higher octaves and Howie also playing higher up the fretboard in a way that's really reminiscent of one of my very favorite bass players of all time, John Deacon from Queen. Ringo then plays a straight time into double time brushed snare fill, so we're getting a lot of variety in the drum part here. And I know that it's well-worn ground, but it baffles me when people underrate or dismiss Ringo. He wasn't just a great timekeeper, but he always wrote and played interesting parts too. This leads us back into the harpsichord break, which is accented by the high register piano also, and this in turn brings us back into the vocal bridge again over that E minor A alternating progression, with the drums leaving lots of space in that 1, 2, 3, 4 count. We also have a magical line here in this section. A gift from the sun to the moon. I hope something changes soon. I really have no idea what Tom means by this line. I'll leave it open to you guys. If anyone has any ideas what a gift from the sun to the moon means, please do tell me. But again, it's a very esoteric, mysterious, Lennon-esque thing to throw into this section of the song, and it's my favorite line in the whole piece. Underneath this, you have the bass and the piano playing that step-up ascending part. So there's so many little things, again, going on here in what sounds superficially to be a very simple and simplistic song, just superbly crafted. We come out of this fairly long bridge section to the twice repeated chorus at around 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and so you'd expect the song to end here. But remember, this song is 5 minutes and 49 seconds. So what are we going to get? All right, folks, it's time for some petty trivia. Your question from last week was this. Which song did Tom and the Heartbreakers cover the most times live in concert? Is it A, Handle with Care by the Traveling Wilburys, B, So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds, C, Oh Well by Fleetwood Mac, or D, Shout by the Isley Brothers? Well, all four were staples of Tom's live sets down the years, and the numbers I pulled from setlist.fm, they may be a little off, but they're usually off by roughly the same percentage, so let's pretend these are the actual numbers for the sake of answering the question. At fourth place in this list is the Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac classic, Oh Well, which was played 103 times live. And I was fortunate enough to see Lindsey Buckingham perform this one live with Fleetwood Mac in 2009 here in Saskatoon. It was during the time that Christine McVie wasn't with the band, so I didn't get to see Songbird, which is probably my favorite post-Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac song, but I did get the delight of seeing Lindsey shred Oh Well and World Turning, which was amazing. And I actually didn't realize until that show how incredible a guitar player that guy really is. In the third most played spot is So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, which was, of course, released as a single from the Pack Up the Plantation live album. It was first played on the Hard Promises tour in 1981, and this classic jangle rocker was played a further 113 times until its last outing at the Forum on October 11th, 2014. The second most played song from the four I gave you is technically a cover, but obviously a band that Tom was a member of. Handle with Care was performed 143 times live between 2002 and 2012, including for the very first time by the band at the Concert for George, which I believe was also the first time that particular song had ever been performed live by any of the principal members of the Traveling Wilburys. So that means your answer is, of course, D, Shout by the Isley Brothers. This song was played live between 1977 and 2001 a total of 146 times, and was often accompanied in the earlier years by Tom's jitterbug dancing, and was often extended for up to 10 minutes as a jam session. And when you listen to that version on Pack Up the Plantation, it just jumps right off the record at you. Interestingly, there is a bootleg copy of the gig where this song was played for the first time live, but it doesn't actually include it. The tape from that gig, which took place in Glasgow on March 26, 1977, ends with the penultimate track, a cover of Route 66. So my guess is that Shout was the encore, perhaps, and simply wasn't captured, as the tapes may have been turned off at that point. Your question for this week is this. Before heading out to tour the debut record, the Heartbreakers played 2 warm-up gigs at which Florida venue? Is it A, the Galaxy Lounge in Cocoa Beach, B, Dubs in Gainesville, C, Button South in Hollandale Beach, or D, the Roxy in Clearwater? Okay, back to the song. Out of these two choruses at the end here, we have that turnaround phrase repeated on bass and piano accompanied by the kick and hats, which transitions back into that lovely Queen-esque high piano and bass interlude, before Ringo, somewhat unexpectedly, thunders us back into a gorgeous, lush vocal harmony section, which is in turn joined by Mike Campbell playing some sumptuous slide lead in the left channel. The song ends on a final root note stop with a then 10-second decay of the notes. It's a really nice crescendoed ending that caps off a very subtle, nuanced performance all round. Okay, I really like everything about this song, more or less. It's one of those tracks that it isn't a barn burner. It doesn't have a huge hook, doesn't feature any real virtuosic pyrotechnics, and lyrically isn't a huge standout to the point where you'd say this is one of the finest examples of Tom Petty's writing. And yet, it's one of those songs that, for me at least, coalesces into a whole that is far greater than the sum of its individual parts. Yes, the addition of Ringo and Carl Wilson definitely add to proceedings, and it's Ringo's hat work specifically that separates this song from pretty much anything else on the album. And look, Steve Ferroni would have played a perfectly wonderful part, I'm sure. Similarly, Howie Epstein is a top table harmony vocalist, and I'm sure that his vocals here, instead of Carl Wilson's, would have also sounded fantastic. But having that very specific voice and that very specific Ringo groove just takes the song into a place it probably wouldn't have ended up in without them. Wildflowers and All the Rest producer Ryan Ulyate commented, Tom thought this was the way to close the album. It feels like a big closing statement. And if Tom hadn't gone and written the brilliant Wake Up Time, you could really see this working as a closer to Wildflowers. And I'll talk about the differences with the mix that was included on Wildflowers and All the Rest when we get there. But again, it highlights the incredibly fertile songwriting zone Tom was in during this period that this song didn't even make the cut for the Wildflowers album. Lyrically, this one's fairly straightforward. It's a tale of longing again that Tom handles so adeptly when he steps into this subject matter. I'm so hung up, I'm going to see her tonight. I'm so hung up, I can't get her out of my mind. There's a very old school feel to that phrase, hung up. And I was going to mention that I love the fact that the title of the song is Hung Up and Overdue, because that line, hung up and overdue, never appears in the lyrics anywhere. But hung up and the word overdue are the two sort of lyrical phrases or the tent poles that sort of support this whole song. So to mix those together for the title, I think is kind of cool. You know, in the chorus line, we're overdue for a dream come true, long time, nothing new. It's a line that adds in an element of mundanity to the longing in that life continues day after day, but love is often fleeting. So this marriage of the emotional and the observational is a really effective pairing, I think, in this song. It's curious, too, that the two songs that reference California were both left off the final Wildflowers track listing. Perhaps Tom being self-conscious about being too prescriptive or direct in that vein. It's a very simple, very direct lyric which sits atop a wonderful arrangement and doesn't need to do too much of the heavy lifting. It's almost like Mike's more reserved guitar part. We do get a little shine and sparkle in a couple of places, but it's part of the ensemble rather than taking a starring role. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. This is one of those sneaky heartbreaker songs that can be easy to forget about because it was left off Wildflowers and added to the end of an album that was half soundtrack, half leftovers, a couple of covers. But from a purely music nerd standpoint, this song is fascinating to me. I enjoy listening to all the nuances and sleights of hand that are taking place without ever interfering with the very lazy, hazy groove and vibe of the song. It's an excellent deep cut, and it's really easy for me to give this one a rock solid 8 out of 10. Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out at deepdivepodcastnetwork.com. You can also check out my other podcasts, Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my best friend Randy Woods. we actually have an episode coming up fairly soon that is going to be released via a very limited run. So absolutely pointless, stupid idea, but I thought it would be kind of cool to do. Also, check out the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with my great pal Corey Morissette. We just released this week our first side of Motley Crue's 1983 Shout at the Devil, which I didn't really enjoy, folks. I don't know if there are any Motley Crue fans out there. I'm not among you. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable. And again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't already. Keep talking to me on social media, and I will keep reading out your comments on the show. And as your weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, please go buy actual physical media at one of your local independent record sellers or stream on official streaming platforms. If you're looking for merchandise, go to tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merchandise for this show, please go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And do check out Tom Petty Radio, which is channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the very last song in season 11, the shortest song in Tom's studio release catalogue, and the last instrumental we'll be discussing, Airport. Bye-bye.